Hi guys. The question in this lecture is what cells does the nervous system need and why does it need them? So in the last lecture we talked about neurons, and in this one we're going to talk about support cells. And by the end of this lecture you should be able to answer the question using these vocabulary terms on the right. First we're going to talk about support cells that protect neurons. Then we're going to talk about the ones that circulate cerebral spinal fluid. Then we're going to talk about the ones that myelinate neurons, and last of all, the ones that protect certain cell bodies in some parts of the nervous system. Remember that when we talk about nervous tissue, the tissue that makes up the nervous system is composed of neurons, which transmit nerve impulses, as well as support cells, which are also called neuroglia, as well as glia. So all three of these terms refer to all of these types of cells down here in red. These support cells cannot transmit nerve impulses. Instead, what they do is they protect and support the neurons so that the neurons can do their job, which is to send information around the body so that your body can work the way that it should. These first four types of support cells, the astrocytes, microglia, ependymal cells, and oligodendrocytes, are found in the central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord. And then these last two, the satellite cells and Schwann cells, are found in the peripheral nervous system, which means the nerves that run from your spine out to all of the other parts of your body. Let's start with the astrocytes. So the reason why they're called astrocytes is because under the microscope they look like stars. So here's an astrocyte here. You can see its main body, and then you can see all of these extensions that come away from it. And so it does look like a star. It comes from the same root word that you get the word astronaut from, or asteroid. Roughly 50% of neural tissue is actually made of astrocytes, and their job is incredibly important. They form a living barrier between the blood vessels, these small blood vessels called capillaries, that bring blood from the heart to feed the brain. And they also could potentially have toxins or bacteria that somehow got into your blood, and the last thing you want is for those things to get into your brain. Fortunately for you, these astrocytes here ensure that only the good stuff is able to be delivered from the blood to your neurons, and that all of the bad stuff is kept away. And so they mediate exchanges between capillaries and neurons. They basically protect neurons from harmful substances, and then they also just regulate the ion concentrations and neurotransmitter levels, which are chemicals that neurons use to communicate with each other. They just regulate those chemicals to make sure that things are, on the up and up. Here's another depiction of what that might look like. So here you have a capillary that is bringing blood from the heart to feed the cells of your brain. And then over here, here's the neuron, the one that is super important because it sends information around the brain and the body. Can't let anything happen to this guy. And so the astrocyte right there is basically, I don't know if you want to call it like a bodyguard, but what it does is it ensures that nothing that could poison the neuron from the blood is actually able to get to the neuron. The next type of support cell is the microglia, which look like these guys here. So the yellow cells in this picture are the neurons, and then this pink one in the middle is the microglia. And then you can also see over here, here's a microglia. There's the main body of it, and then you can see all of these spider-like processes. And so under the microscope, it does look like a spider. And these are phagocytes. What they do is they basically eat dead stuff and bacteria. And so they make sure that your nervous tissue doesn't get cluttered with debris. Between the two of these, the microglia and the astrocytes, you have a lot of protection for your neurons because what they do is they form what we call the blood-brain barrier. Why do you need that? Your brain cannot handle even the tiniest fluctuations of any kind of chemical the way that other organs can. Your brain is super sensitive, and then those neurons, remember, don't undergo cell division. So if something happens to your nervous tissue, damage can be permanent. Whereas for other parts of your body, if you damage, like, your muscles or your skin, or even your bones, to some extent, those tissues will just simply regenerate. Your brain cannot do that. So as a result, neurons are kept separated from the blood-borne substances that can get into your body from things that you eat or from scratches that might be in your skin. Things can get into your blood, but they should not cross into your brain because of this blood-brain barrier, which is composed of the least permeable capillaries in the entire human body. So here's what can cross the blood-brain barrier. Good stuff that your brain cells actually need, like water and sugar, essential amino acids, fats, and gases like oxygen. And then there are certain drugs that can also cross the blood-brain barrier. So alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, and anesthetics, you know that those all affect your brain. So obviously they cross into your brain. Here are the things that are kept out. Metabolic waste, urea, which is used to form urine, toxins, whole proteins, and then most drugs are prevented from getting into your brain. So if you take, for example, aspirin or like Tylenol or things like that, those do not get into your brain. And then non-essential amino acids also don't get in. So here's what the blood-brain barrier looks like. This is a normal blood vessel somewhere else in your body. So this might be like a blood vessel in your fingertips or somewhere. And you'll notice that it's composed of these cells. Here's a cell here. Here's another one here, right? Here's the nucleus of the cell that's making up, this would be a smooth muscle cell, like most likely. And it's making up the walls of the capillaries. And there are some spaces in between these where you basically can have certain substances going in and out, like oxygen or whatever. Here, you'll notice that the blood vessels that are in your brain are really tightly stuck together. So these tight junctions don't allow things to get in. And then on top of that, they're surrounded by these glial cells, so the astrocytes, the microglia, things like that, so that very, very few things can get in. Really, the only things that can pass through are lipid-soluble substances, because all of these cells involved here are made of, like, they have cell membranes that are made of things called phospholipids, which are fatty. And so fatty things can cross, like fat-based alcohols, but other things that are water-based cannot cross. And then cells like bacteria cannot cross. Here's another depiction of that. So here you have the blood vessel. Imagine that blood is flowing through this empty space right here. And then here is a neuron right there that is receiving good stuff from the blood, but you also have these astrocytes that are so this is a projection from an astrocyte. Here's another one that are also there to basically destroy any bad stuff that could be leaking out of your blood. Here's another depiction of that. So we're going to just zoom in on one part of the blood vessel wall right here. That would be this thing here. Okay, so this layer would be the blood vessel wall. The blood is up here at the top of this image, and these are different types of white blood cells that you'll find in the blood itself that are just always there, and their job is to clean up any bad stuff that might be in your blood. But then even if some toxins or bacteria or whatever don't get destroyed by these white blood cells and do manage to cross through the cells that line the blood vessel wall, you also have on top of that astrocytes and microglia in the brain that are there to just further protect your brain cells from bad stuff that might be in your blood. So this is the blood-brain barrier. Okay, next we're going to discuss ependymal cells. So You can see them down here. Here's an ependymal cell. Here's another ependymal cell. Here's a like a drawing of that. And then you can see that these ependymal cells basically form a layer that completely lines these cavities or these empty spaces in the brain. There's fluid that fills those empty spaces, and then these cells all have these little hairs. They're called cilia. So you can see some here, and then in this micrograph image, you can see additional cilia just like all here. And what they do is they beat in concert. So they beat in a coordinated way that helps to circulate cerebrospinal fluid, which fills the brain and the spinal cord. And so they make sure that the cerebral spinal fluid is constantly moving, and that fluid forms this protective cushion around the central nervous system. So you have lots of, not lots, but you have some major empty cavities in the interior of your brain, as well as space between your brain and your skull. And all of those spaces are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is abbreviated as CSF. It's very watery, and it has some good stuff in it, like vitamin C and ions, and it's always circulating throughout the entire brain. So here you can see cerebrospinal fluid circulating through these ventricles right here. And here's the lateral view of that same thing. And then on top of that, you have cerebrospinal fluid circulating between your brain and your skull, going all the way around and then all the way down your spinal cord and back. So if you've ever gotten a spinal tap, that's where they basically take a very, very thin sterilized needle and they insert it into your spinal cord to try to draw out some of that cerebrospinal fluid if they suspect that you have a bacterial infection or something like that that might, you know, damage your brain. And so what the ependymal cells do is they just keep beating with their little hairs to constantly cause the cerebrospinal fluid to flow everywhere all throughout so that they can cushion the brain and nourish the brain cells, and also remove waste from the brain cells. Okay, next we're going to talk about oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells. And these have essentially the same function, but in different parts of your nervous system. So both of these basically wrap axons with myelin. Here you can see one oligodendrocyte, and it's going to send out multiple like arms from itself, and it's going to wrap these axons that are nearby it with myelin to form those myelin sheaths to insulate the axons and make nerve impulses more efficiently transmitted down the axon. Here's another depiction of that. So here's the cell body of the oligodendrocyte, and it is myelinating all of these axons around it. Over here, Schwann cell, it does essentially the same thing, but instead of one, over here you had one oligodendrocyte myelinating multiple axons. This will be one Schwann cell myelinating one portion of one axon. So right here, this is a Schwann cell. Over here, this is a Schwann cell. And when you zoom in, what you'll see is it's actually just one cell that's wrapped itself around the axon multiple times. And this is how it does it. So the blue thing here is the axon. It's a cross-section of the axon. Just imagine that the axon is coming out of the computer towards your face and going into the computer away from you. Here's the Schwann cell, and you can see that as it matures, it wraps itself around and around and around, and there's the nucleus of the Schwann cell there. The main difference between the two is that the Schwann cells myelinate axons in your peripheral nervous system, so all of the nerves that go out from your spinal cord to all the parts of your body. The oligodendrocytes myelinate axons in your central nervous system, so axons that go from one part of your brain to another, or from your brain down your spinal cord, and so on. And just to reiterate, if this is a multipolar neuron that is sending axons out to parts of your body, then this makes up your peripheral. This is a peripheral nervous system neuron in that case. And then this would be a Schwann cell myelinating one part of the axon. And then once again, remember that the spaces in between Schwann cells are called nodes of Ranvier. So we have multiple Schwann cells myelinating this one axon. Last of all, you have satellite cells that provide just like, here's a satellite cell here, here's a satellite cell here. And so for certain neurons in your peripheral nervous system, the satellite cells just stick themselves onto the cell body to protect and cushion it. Here's another depiction of that. So here you can see this is a peripheral nervous system neuron. Here is, this might be the dendrite, this might be the axon over here. You have Schwann cells that are myelinating the axons or the nerve fibers, and then you have satellite cells that are cushioning and protecting the cell body. So here are all of the cells that we just talked about all at once. If you took a cross-section of the brain and zoomed in on one part of it, this is what you might see. So this is a neuron here, a multipolar neuron, that is being protected by these green astrocytes here and here. Here's another astrocyte here. You can see that it's wrapped itself around the blood vessel and around the neuron so that it can transfer good stuff from the blood to the neuron, but keep away bad stuff. You also have these blue microglia just like kind of patrolling around, eating dead stuff and bad stuff that might get out of the blood. Here you have an oligodendrocyte because remember, this is in the brain, and oligodendrocytes myelinate central nervous system axons. And so it's just going to kind of like myelinate all these axons here and here. So you have all these oligodendrocytes. You don't see Schwann cells in here because they're in the peripheral nervous system. Similarly, you don't see satellite cells here because those are also in the peripheral nervous system. And then you see these ependymal cells here that are going to wave their little cilia to make sure that the cerebrospinal fluid, which is this blue fluid in the lower right corner, is constantly circulating throughout the entire brain to cushion it and protect it and stuff like that. Here are your key takeaways. Support cells are cells that are specialized to assist and or protect neurons. Among them, astrocytes and microglia form the blood-brain barrier to protect neurons from potential toxins in the blood and bacteria. Ependymal cells circulate cerebrospinal fluid to cushion and nourish brain cells. Oligodendrocytes in the CNS and Schwann cells in the PNS insulate parts of the neuron and maximize efficiency of nerve impulse transmission. And last of all, satellite cells in the PNS cushion neuron cell bodies. So I want you to go back to the beginning and see if you can answer this essential question using all of these vocabulary in your own words to demonstrate mastery.